Okay, good morning, everyone. We have the privilege of studying Parshas Miketz this week. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. I hope everyone's doing all right and preparing for the nor'easter that's coming our way later today. If anybody needs anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Obviously, we'll check in on people as much as we can. Okay, but in the meantime, let us study the Parsha. Parshas Miketz is, I think it's one of the most exciting parshios in the Torah. I mean, the whole story of Yosef is so rich in detail and really, has such fascinating elements of character development. And so Parshas Miketz, I remember as a kid always kind of looking forward to Parshas Miketz because that was like the climax with the dreams. Vayigash is also sort of a climax as well, but I don't know, the dreams of Miketz were always so fascinating, and to see how the dreams launch Yosef into his position of power and success. It's a rags to riches type story, and to see that playing out was always very fascinating. Plus, as a kid, I really loved the musical Andrew Lloyd Webber, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and so to see the interplay between the musical and elements from the Torah was always very interesting, and it put some fascinating images into your mind as you go back to the Parsha after seeing the musical. To take those images with you back into the story is it's so interesting, and the songs as well. The songs, a few of the songs have really stayed in my head. So that I could be listening to Parshas Miketz, and in the back of my mind I hear "Go go go Joseph," So, anyways, so it's a very exciting Parsha. What's interesting, what's fascinating about this Parsha is that it has one of the several instances in the Torah where something is repeated unnecessarily. That is that the Torah tells us the dreams of Paro, and then Paro tells us the dreams of Paro. And anytime the Torah repeats something, it's really calling on us to read the details very carefully, because it's not just a theological principle, but it's an exegetical principle that there is nothing extraneous in the Torah. Every single letter, every single jot and tittle, if I'm saying that correctly, has deep meaning behind it. And so, anytime the Torah presents us with the same thing twice, obviously it begs study. Some of the other instances, as we know, that we find in the Torah is when the servant of Abraham repeats to Lavan everything that all the instructions that he was given by Abraham, and others that I know we're familiar with. But this is one of the good ones, because it's I think because the repetition is largely parallel. There aren't a lot of differences, but there are several critical differences. And obviously, we're not going to discuss all the differences between the two accounts, but we're definitely going to focus on the major ones. So the Parsha begins with the Torah, the narrator, as it were, or Hashem, telling us the dreams of Paro. Vayehi miketz shnasayim yamim. It was at the conclusion of 2 years. This was 2 years after Yosef had interpreted the dreams for the wine butler and the baker. 2 years later, Ufaro cholem, Paro has his own dreams. V'hinei omed ala yaor, and behold, he is standing upon the Yaor, the Nile River, which was one of the central geographical features of Egypt. The Nile River, of course, is where that area derived much of its sustenance. V'hinei min hayaor olos sheva paros yifos marov reos basar vatirenu ba'achu. Ba'achu, I should say. Coming up from the Nile were 7 cows, fair and fair flesh. I didn't say the page numbers. My apologies, in case anybody was relying on that. Page 221 in the Steinsaltz Chumash, page 222 in the Art Scroll Chumash. So I'm not going to read the whole dream, because I know you're familiar with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen because I put the two accounts of the dreams parallel, side by side, so that we can compare them more easily. But the first account of the dream, which is the Torah's narration of the dream, that's from Pasuk Aleph to Pasuk Zayin, the first 7 psukim. And after Paro has his dreams, he wakes up, he calls for his magicians and his wise men, and they can't really, not really, but they cannot interpret the dreams. And then the wine butler speaks up and says, I was in prison and there was this guy who could interpret dreams. And so they send for Yosef. And then Paro conveys his dreams to Yosef. And that begins, Paro conveying the dreams begins on the next page on Pasuk Yudzayin. Vayidaber Paro el Yosef b'chalomi hineni omed al svas hayor. In my dream, I am standing on the edge of the Nile. And he goes on to relate the dreams through Pasuk Chav Daled, right? Verses 17 to 24. And clearly the Torah could have just said, when Paro's speaking to Yosef, right, the Torah could have just said, and Paro told him the dreams. And the Torah did not have to give us the language of Paro, conveying the dreams. Right? We already know the content of the dreams because the Torah told us. Or the reverse. The Torah could have said, after 2 years, Paro had dreams and no one could interpret them without telling us the details of the dreams. And then Yosef is summoned, and then the Torah could have given us the details, the content of the dream, through Paro speaking to Yosef. So one way or another, we didn't really need both accounts, but we get them anyway. So I'm gonna share my screen right now. For those of you who cannot see, I'll try to make sure to speak out everything that I'm saying. But here we go. I'm sharing my screen, and I just want to do one thing here. I just want to see if I can do it side by side. There is a way, and I'm not finding it right now, but that's okay. Okay. All right. Anyways, we have here the two dreams side by side. I'm hoping everyone can see them, and so you'll see on the right side, Hachalomot. I wrote in Hebrew the dreams, Psukim 1 to 7, Aleph to Zayin. That's on the right side, and on the left side is Hachalomot Lefi Paro, the dreams according to Paro. And obviously there are a number of differences, but I put in bold the differences that I wanted to focus on. So you'll see that in the Hebrew and in the English, I bolded 3 phrases, and these 3 phrases are important. One of them is more important than the others. So let me begin reading again. Vayhi Miketz shnatayim yamim. I'm reading from the top right. Ufarocho le v'nei omed hal yaor. V'nei min hayor alos sheva paros yifos marav rios basar vatirena ba'achu. After 2 years' time, Paro dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. When out of the Nile there came up 7 cows, handsome and sturdy, and they grazed in the reed grass. Pasuk Gimel, v'nei sheva paros acheros olos acharehen min hayor os marav darkos basar. V'ta'amodna etel haparos al svas hayor. And the 7 cows, 7 other cows come up who were not good looking. They were gaunt, they were thin, and they stood beside the cows on the bank of the Nile. And then we know that the thin cows consume the bigger cows. And then he has a second dream, and in that second dream, he has a similar dream with the sheaves of wheat, Sheva Shibalim. Okay, so that's on the right side. Those are the dreams according to Paro, and I bolded that phrase Vatabmod na etzel haparos al svas hayor because Paro captures every element of the dream when he relates it to Yosef, but doesn't mention that. He doesn't mention what the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us that they stood next to them. Now, this might be an incidental detail. It might be unimportant, but it is a difference, and it's something for us to focus on. So let's take a look at the left-hand column, which is Paro relating the dreams to Yosef. Achalamot lefi Paro, pasuk Yud Zayin. Vaydaber Paro el Yosef b'chalomi, hineni omed al sfas hayaor. Now, here's a difference I'm not going to focus on, but when the Torah tells us the dream, it's v'hinei omed al hayaor, on the Nile, and in Paro's dream, he's hineni omed al sfas hayaor, right, on the bank of the Nile. Is that a fundamental difference? For some commentaries, yes. For some commentaries, this is here to teach us something. For what I want to talk about today, I'm not gonna focus on it, but I just want to give you an example of differences that for some are subtle and for others are not so subtle. Anyways, v'hinei min hayaor olos sheva paros burios basar vifos toar vatirena ba'achu. V'hinei sheva paros acheros olos achrehan dalos v'raos toar me'od virakos basar. So you see that Paro uses slightly different language, but capturing the same essential elements as the dream as it was related by the Torah. When out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows and grazed in the reed grass, presently there followed them 7 other cows, scrawny, ill-formed, and emaciated. Now Paro adds the following. Lo ra'isi chahena b'chol eretz Mitzrayim laroa. In verse 19, when Paro describes the skinny cows, the scrawny ones, he adds, never had I seen their likes for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. I've never seen anything like these cows before. The Torah doesn't convey that observation when the Torah gives its rendition of the dreams. The first presentation of the dreams, it does not contain this observation by Paro that he had never seen such cows, and indeed, it comes in place of something else, right? That when in the Torah's rendition, in the first rendition of the dreams, it just says "V'tamona etzel haparos los v'asayor." They stood next to each other. Instead of that, we have something different. We have Paro's analysis, and the fact that Paro adds this element of analysis when he conveys the dreams to Yosef is what we're going to talk about this morning. Because it might make sense that the Torah doesn't give us Paro's judgment when the Torah tells us the dreams, because maybe the Torah is just telling us the dreams, right? The Torah isn't giving us a window into the mind of Paro in Psukim Aleph through Zion, in the first, when the narrator conveys the dreams. It's just telling us the content of the dreams, right? Maybe it's not necessarily giving us a window into Paro's mind. As opposed to when Paro conveys the dreams to Yosef, he adds in his own analysis. He adds in his own observation. By the way, I'd never seen such a thing. Or, just talking out another possibility, or no, maybe when Paro had the dream, part of the dream was that analysis, that judgment, right? Paro himself is in the dream, right? Paro is in the dream standing on the Nile River. And perhaps as part of the dream, he makes this observation to himself that during the dream, he observes that he had not seen cows like that before in Egypt. And then it would be interesting that the Torah leaves that out. The Torah leaves out part of the dream, whereas Paro makes sure to include it. Another possibility, how to understand this difference. Well, let's continue. I just want to look at the third bolded phrase, pasuk chaf, atochalna haparos harakos varaos es sheva haparos harishonos habrios. Right. So the scrawny cows, the skinny cows, consumed the 7 cows. Now watch this. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Atavona el kirbena, right? They were inside. The fat cows were inside the scrawny cows. V'lo noda kivo el kirbenu mar'ehen ra kasher batchila va'ikatz. And one could not tell that they had consumed them, for they looked just as bad as before, and I awoke. This is the most major difference between the two versions of the dreams. Right? When we learn this story as kids, so we know that one of the fantastic elements of the dreams is that the scrawny cows ate the fat cows, but they didn't change appearance. They didn't become fat themselves. Something which is just, miraculous or fantastic, except that it was just a dream. But if we read these two accounts carefully, we find that that's only mentioned by Paro. The Torah doesn't make that observation. In the Torah's rendition of the dream, the first rendition of the dream, Sukkim Aleph through Zayin, it doesn't say that. It just says that they consume them. Fantastic in and of itself, but it doesn't say that the appearance of the scrawny cows didn't change, that the appearance of the scrawny cows did not change even after consuming the fat cows. The Torah doesn't tell us that element, and Paro does. And that's one of the major features of the dreams. So how do we understand? What does this mean that the Torah leaves out this element, and Paro includes it? So the Rashbam and other commentaries, they note this, they recognize this, and so they say very simply that what Paro is doing is adding in his own judgments, his own observations as he is conveying the dream, right? That what Paro is essentially doing is saying, like, this is the vision that I had, and this is something that I noticed in the vision, and that the fact that the Torah doesn't say it doesn't mean it wasn't part of the dream. It's just that it was the part of the dream in which Paro was thinking. And so the Torah does not give us a window into the mind of Paro. Instead, the Torah lets Paro speak for himself. But let's ask why, right? Why is it that the Torah presents the dreams in this way? Why is it that this element is left out of the Torah's rendition, but Paro adds it in? Is this really something that did or did not happen in the dream? Is this Paro's interpretation? And most importantly, does Yosef know that Paro adds this observation? Right? We, the readers of this story, so we see that the element's not there, the first time the dream is presented. But the first time that the dream is presented, Yosef is still in prison. So we, the readers of the Torah, we're there for both renditions of the dreams. But Yosef is only there for one. Yosef is only there for the second one when Paro tells him the dreams. But does Yosef know that critical element, that element wasn't in the first rendition of the dreams? Does Yosef know that Paro added this in on his own? So, in order to answer these questions, so we have to look at Yosef's interpretation. So I'm going to take this down, and we will now look in our Chumashim, and let's take a look at Yosef's interpretation. Vayomer Yosef el Paro, verse 25. Pasuk Chaf Hey. Vayomer Yosef el Paro, Chalom Paro Echad Hu. So the first thing that Yosef says is that your two dreams are really one dream, which I'm sure is a brilliant insight for us reading this many years later. It seems a little bit obvious, right? It's the same activity, the same concept happening twice. So, it makes sense. It makes sense to say that it's all one dream. Es asher Elokim oseh higid lifaro. And that which Hashem is doing, that's which Hashem does, he told to Paro. In other words, it's a prophecy. It's a prophecy of what's going to happen. Sheva paros hatovos sheva shanim heina, v'sheva hashibolim hatovos sheva shanim heina, chalom echadhu. Now this might not be so obvious, but it's important that we have Yosef interpreting this dream. And that is that the seven good cows represent 7 years, and the 7 good stalks or sheaves, I should say, also represent 7 years, but they are one dream. Right? One might be tempted to add them together. Right? One might be tempted to say, 7 plus 7, maybe there will be 14 good years. But no, Yosef continues to insist, Chalom Echadhu. They are 1 year. They are one dream. V'sheva haparos harakos v'aros v'alos achrein sheva shanim hin v'sheva shibulim harakos shlos yalganim yu sheva shnei ra'av. Right, and so the 7 scrawny cows and the seven scrawny sheaves, they are years of famine. And as Yosef continues, right, he begins to transition into, analysis, right? Hu adavar asher dibarti al Paro asher Elokim oseh here'es Paro. This is what I said to you, to Paro. What Hashem is going to do, He's showing to you. Hine sheva shanim ba'os sava gadol b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. There'll be 7 plenty years. V'kamu sheva shnei rav acharehen, and 7 years will come. V'nishkach kol hasava be'eretz Mitzrayim, and it'll be so bad that the years of plenty will be forgotten. V'chilah hara'av es haaretz, and the famine will devastate the land. V'lo yivadah hasava ba'aretz mipnei harav hahu acharechein. And the plenty will not be known in the land due to that famine afterward, for it shall be very severe. And this is where Yosef analyzes that element that only Paro conveys, right? The velo noda, right? That when the scrawny cows consume the fat cows, that their appearance, the appearance of the scrawny cows won't change, and that Yosef interprets as indicating that the famine will be so bad, represented by the scrawny cows. It'll be so bad that the years of plenty will be forgotten. And so what's interesting is that Yosef's analysis it seems to be addressed directly to that element that Paro added in. Let's continue reading a little bit more. Lamed Beis, Val hishanos hachalom el Paro pamayim, and the fact that this dream happened twice. Ki nachon hadavar me'im elokim laher elokim lasoso. It's certainly going to happen, and it's going to happen quickly. Ve'ata, and now, right? Yosef is transitioning now into analysis. Ve'ata yere Paro ish navon v'chacham, v'shisehu al eretz Mitzrayim. Right? Paro should appoint someone to minister to the land of Mitzrayim. Yasef Paro v'yafkid pikidim al haaretz. He should appoint a whole bureaucracy. V'chimesh eretz Mitzrayim b'sheva shnei ha-sava. And he should deputize the entire land, so that so that everyone will cooperate during the years of plenty. Vikbitzuas kol ochel hashanim hatavos habaos eilev yitzruvar tachas ya paro ochel be'arim v'shamaru. Right, they should gather all of the plenty, and it should be under Paro's watch. And they should hold on to the food from the years of plenty so that they can feed themselves during the years of famine. And clearly, what Paro hears from Yosef makes a lot of sense, and it resonates. But what exactly is going on here? What is it about that element that Paro added in that Yosef picked up on, that enabled Yosef to interpret his dreams so effectively? So I was reading an article from Rabbi Tamir Granot from Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he points out something very interesting, that the way he reads this story is that Yosef intuits Paro's anxiety. What makes Yosef so successful, of course, being supported by Hashem, is that element that Paro conveys that the Torah doesn't. That idea that you couldn't even tell that the scrawny cows had consumed the fat cows represents Paro's dilemma, the thing that scares Paro the most, right? To see fat cows, to see skinny cows, to see one consume the other, that's already fantastic. But even stranger is the fact that their appearance wouldn't change, and so the fact that only Paro conveys that element is a reflection of Paro's mindset. And Paro's mindset is one of anxiety and uncertainty, perhaps even fear over the most inexplicable part of the dream. It's one thing for sheaves to consume other sheaves. It's one thing for cows to consume other cows. That's fantastic in and of itself. But the fact that the appearance wouldn't change is just a higher layer, a further element that is bizarre to Paro. And I'll get to the comment in a second from Ruth. But basically what he's saying, what Yosef is doing is addressing that anxiety directly. Right? The fact that the appearance of the cows do not change. And Yosef picks up on the fact that Paro makes this observation, and the fact that Yosef addresses it directly is what enables Yosef to succeed. And the fact that Yosef offers a solution based on that element of the dream, right? Because what Yosef does basically is take that element of the dream, which suggests that the years of famine will be so bad, and finds even deeper meaning in that element of the dream, that they should hold on to the food from the years of plenty so that they can support themselves during the years of famine, is basically Yosef finding a solution where Paro only experienced anxiety, right? To see the fact that the cows did not change appearance, the scrawny cows did not change appearance, was a source of anxiety for Paro, but an idea of a solution for Yosef. And what Rabbi Granot suggests, and I think it's a brilliant insight, is that Yosef represents, as the child of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, represents something fundamentally different than Paro and Mitzrayim. Whereas Paro and Mitzrayim only understand, determined fate as pagans, who who believe that everything in this world is under the control of gods. So for them, for Paro, such a dream is just a terrible decree, one that he wasn't even certain what it was. But for him, the dream was just something. It was just an omen, a prediction of the future, something that is gonna happen, and something that they can do nothing about. That's the perspective of Paro and Mitzrayim and the pagan culture that they lived in. But for Yosef understands, as someone with divine inspiration, Yosef understands that we can have control over our fate, that we have free will, that Hashem has given us the tools to engage this world and to elevate ourselves in this world. And so where Paro sees fate, Yaakov sees opportunity. Yaakov sees destiny. And for those who know me, I always talk about destiny when in the book of Bereshis. But here, that very same element that was a source of anxiety and fear for Paro was an opportunity for Yosef. That there would be terrible years of famine that follow years of plenty wasn't something to just fear and be anxious over like Paro, but was something that could be reckoned with, something that could be managed, that could be dealt with. And so that's why the Torah places that observation only in the mouth of Paro. Right? We saw how the fact that the scrawny cows did not change appearance wasn't told to us in the Torah's rendition. It was only told to us in Paro's rendition because that defines Paro. That's who Paro is. Paro is someone who can only witness what's happening in these dreams as a prediction, and is incapable of seeing anything past his deterministic view of the world. His deterministic view of the world based on pagan culture. And so that's why Paro was so vexed, and that's why none of his magicians, none of his wise people could interpret the dreams, because they were all living in a culture of determinism. Whereas Yosef, who is part of a tradition of believers in God, know that people can change their fate, that people hold their destiny in their hands, and that Hashem gives us choices, and how to and gives us abilities how to reckon with the challenges that we're presented with. I know this isn't necessarily a Parsha class idea, but it's not necessarily directly from the Parsha, but I mean, when you think about what's going on in this world and how we're trying to, how several companies have been able to find a vaccine for a pandemic that's affecting everybody worldwide, it's just a very powerful demonstration of this idea that even with all the terrible things that happen, we can and should continue to strive to find a better way, to utilize the science that Hashem has given us, so that we don't accept a fate that is difficult and instead try to overcome what seems like fate and find a greater destiny. And that's exactly what Yosef is able to represent as he interprets these dreams. When when you think about the fact that all of this is happening, this idea is happening against the backdrop of a story that Hashem predicted, it's a little bit strange, right? Here I'm talking about how Yosef represents the fact that you can change your fate, that you hold your destiny in your own hands, that even though Hashem even though Hashem says there's going to be good years followed by bad years, you can still do something about it. All of that's happening against the backdrop of a bris, of a covenant that guarantees that the Jewish people will end up in Mitzrayim. It's such a contrast, such a fascinating contrast, right? Hashem has determined this story, no? right? Hashem says to Avraham that I'm going to send your children down to Mitzrayim. They're going to be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And here Yosef conveys the message that don't worry about predictions so much. You have your fate in your own hands. You can determine your destiny. And yet he's living out a bris. He's living out a covenant over which he has no control. It's such a startling contrast. If that's how we're going to read what Yosef represents in this story, then how do we understand it against the backdrop of the bris? I've been grappling with this all week. And so what I've told myself, what I've been thinking about is the fact that, well, first of all, we have these ideas in Chazal that perhaps, the Gullus wasn't as long, or there are certain elements of it that were more harsh than they were supposed to be, or they were less harsh than they were supposed to be, and that there was a certain element of destiny within the parameters of the bris. But I don't think that's a full answer. I really don't. Instead, what I'd like to suggest is that the concept of Jewish destiny as it plays out here in this bris, here in this covenant that Hashem makes with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and that Yosef is now going to be the transition into advancing that bris even further, that concept of Jewish destiny, it has a structure to it, right? Putting aside the bris, I mean, just the whole concept of Jewish history leading towards the coming of the Moshiach, that's something we believe is going to happen, one way or another. So clearly, Jewish destiny, plays out within a certain framework. How the role that we as individuals, as communities play in that framework, that may be under our control, but clearly history has a destination. History has a goal. A larger history with the coming of the Moshiach, and the more narrow history that we find in the Torah of this bris, of this covenant. Clearly that structure is there, right? Hashem promises this land. Hashem promises they'll be slaves and then they'll come back to this land, and that's what happens. They're slaves and they come back to this land. But clearly, how that plays out on the local level for individuals, for communities, that clearly is still within our hands. And the fact that Hashem would determine this structure, the fact that Hashem would construct this destiny for us without really our choice, it's not because Hashem just controls everything, even though he does, but I believe it's because Hashem wants something for us, and Hashem wants us to have those opportunities to elevate ourselves. And so this bris, this covenant, even though it imposes a certain structure on history, but it's a structure that gives us opportunity. It's a structure that gives us the opportunity to be part of that bris, to be part of that covenant, or not be part of it, right? Yishmael maybe could have been part of it, but he chose not to. Esav maybe could have been, but he chose not to, right? All of Yaakov's children chose to be part of that bris, part of that covenant. So yeah, the structure is there, it's created by Hashem, but it's still up to people to determine what role they're going to play within that structure. Just think about Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to be the leader of the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu rejected the call of Hashem at first to lead the Jewish people out. I mean, if Hashem was going to take the Jewish people out of Egypt one way or another, who's Moshe to say what role he's going to play? But no, Moshe, by resisting and then acquiescing, shows us that even though there's that larger structure, even though there's that larger destiny, even though the Jewish people are going to be redeemed from Egypt one way or another, Moshe still has a choice about what role he's going to play. And you know what this reminds me of? You know who this reminds me of? This reminds me of Esther. Mi yodeh im le'es kazos higat lamalchus. Right? Mordechai says to Esther, who knows if it was for this opportunity to save the Jewish people that you became royalty. It's the very same idea, right? Mordechai says, if it's not you, then salvation to the Jewish people will come mimakom acher, from another place, right? Hashem has a destiny. Hashem has a structure of that destiny for the Jewish people that Hashem imposes on history, on the world. But how it plays out and the role that we play in that destiny, that's up to us. And so Yosef, Yosef is the most powerful demonstration of that in his own story and in the way he communicates to Paro. Right? Yosef has his own dreams. And it's only until later on in life that he figures out what those dreams are about. But clearly him figuring out what those dreams are about are part of him finding his place in that bris that's going to play out no matter what. And Yosef draws on that concept. Consciously or not, Yosef draws on that concept as he's talking to Paro. He draws on this concept that, Hashem has a plan for the next 14 years for Mitzrayim. There are going to be some good years, there are going to be some bad years. But you, Paro, what are you going to do about them? You could do nothing. You can take a more deterministic acceptance of your fate, or you can prepare. You can do something about it. You can choose what your role is going to be in those 7 + 7 years. And again, Yosef is triggered or is inspired to take that perspective with Paro, because he hears in Paro's own words the anxiety over this bizarre fate. This bizarre fate that the scrawny cows did not change appearance after consuming the larger cows. So that's everything that's playing out in this story with Yosef, and the deep significance it has for the story of the Jewish people, for the players in that story, and how each one is going to interact. So Ruth mentioned in the comments, I heard an interpretation that the scrawny cows represent Klal Yisrael, and Paro's dream is a predilection of our eventual victory at Yisrael's triumph. That's very nice, and I think that I would say that can connect to what I'm saying, because if these dreams are about us as well, then again, here you have dreams about us as a people, and how things are going to play out. But it's up to the actors involved, right? It's up to the Yosefs and others to help usher that along, bring that about. Okay, all right. Thank you everybody for joining. Have a great day. I hope you manage the weather all right, and be well. We'll be in touch. Take care. Have a good week.